The internet runs on this protocol TCP/IP. And then another guy comes in and they build HTML on top of TCP/IP, or they build Bitcoin on top of TCP/IP. People don't really need to know that. They don't even need to know that that protocol exists. People should look at layer ones as like a technology or as a tool.
Peyton, known as BigPey, is a dedicated expert in the Cardano blockchain, sharing insights and driving innovation. Through his work with Atrium Lab and Bloom, he simplifies complex crypto concepts and bridges the gap between blockchain technology and practical understanding.
I had a bunch of computer parts lying around my house. Some guy came to my house, he bought 2 GPUs at once. I said, what do you need 2 of these for? He's like, crypto mining. You have this network of computers that are processing transactions. You needed a really power-hungry computer with proof of work. It takes this thing called a block, which is just a data, and it submits it to the network. Cardano, it was one of the first layer 1 blockchains to come out. And really what it is, it's just like proof of work, but you're removing that useless power consumption and the fake problems that need to be solved.
Welcome back to the show, my 3 favorite people. Today we're sitting down with Peyton. He goes by BigPey on social media. He is a creator that makes content on YouTube and on X and other social platforms, talking all about Cardano, Web3, crypto. So if you're new to the world of crypto, or if you're interested, you know a little bit, this is essentially a 101 for Cardano. A technology that I truly believe is going to change the world. And Peyton is probably the best person to explain that because he can speak closer to our level as people who aren't extremely technical. So if you want to be at the forefront of technology, you want to learn about something that I confidently believe will change the world, this episode is perfect for you. We explain what Cardano is, how it was created, how it can change the world, why the government has changed their stance on crypto and Cardano specifically, and where all things are going in a world full of AI, tech changes, and emerging crypto products. So let's not waste any time. Let's get right into it. This conversation was awesome. And we are live. How's the day going, man?
It's going good. I really just getting started. It's 10 a.m. here. I've had a couple of calls, had a walk, a cup of coffee. So, happy Thursday here.
It's a solid morning, man. It's a solid morning. Well, I'm excited that you gave me some of your time. I think this episode's going to be really valuable for you. I'm a massive Cardano fanboy, and you're someone who creates content about Cardano quite often and is really in the weeds of it all. So super excited to chat about all that. I think if you don't know anything about Cardano, this will kind of act as, let's say, a Cardano 101 or an entry level into the space that many people from the outside see as almost cult-like. So I want to kind of get some inside sources on this because I think it's not what a lot of people think. And so my first question for you is, how did you stumble into this world of Web3 in general and then specifically the whole Cardano ecosystem?
Yeah, definitely. To be honest, I was really into video games growing up, almost a little too into them. I learned how to build computers and host servers and run Minecraft servers, actually, all just for a drive to play video games when I was younger. I was like 13, 14, 15. And then, I had a bunch of computer parts lying around my house because I liked building computers and I would buy and sell them on Craigslist. And, some guy said, he came to my house, he bought 2 GPUs at once. I said, what do you need 2 of these for? He's like, crypto mining. So I, as a, 16-year-old, it's just ding, ding, ding. I had a miner set up within a week and I was mining at the time Ethereum and Verge. And, around that time I found Cardano. And the reason I found it, is I think a lot of people new to crypto or, have been here for a while will understand this. I found Cardano because the price was so small. I think it was like 9 cents at the time. And I hadn't really understood market caps yet or tokenomics. So I was like 9 cents versus Bitcoin that's 3,000. This is a good buy. So, for anybody watching, if you're new, that's not a good way to purchase a token. That's why meme coins are .00000 nowadays to get people like me at that time. So, I realized that, I could just trade all of my, Ethereum mining into Cardano. And, as I was doing that, I was learning more about, proof of stake. I realized that, proof of work was, very power hungry, very intensive. And, I knew people that had spent, a lot of money to get into Bitcoin mining. And it wasn't, very lucrative because at the time, the people that were making the miners were mining on them for years, before selling them. So you're kind of like buying somebody's like used hardware so that you can maybe, make a profit. So this kind of, pushed me towards with proof of stake. I'm like, well, what if we just got rid of all of the power hungriness, and the finite thing in the ecosystem is the actual token, and then you earn the token by, adding to the network. And, that was around 2017, where I really started getting into Cardano, and it took a bit longer, than we were hoping at the time. Proof of stake, as we know it now, ended up launching in 2020. And I created one of the first stake pools on Cardano called Bloom, and we minted the 8th ever block on Cardano. And while I was doing that, I was just making educational videos. I did a video on how to become a stake pool operator because I thought it would be good to have thousands of different SPOs to decentralize the network. And then I was making videos for regular users too. What is a wallet? How to set up a wallet? How do I, stake to a stake pool? How do I pick a stake pool? So that's really kind of how I ventured into this space, was, kind of curiosity, existing experience that I had. And then, I liked making YouTube videos. So, I knew something. I felt it'd be good to just tell everyone else what I figured out, essentially.
That's so interesting, man. Very similar stories here. I got shown the world of crypto in a grade 10 business class where I learned about Bitcoin. I think Bitcoin was dollars at the time, and how they were pitching it on like, oh, it's being used in some campuses for like transactions just to prove the concept that it works and all this stuff. And that captured my attention. I didn't pay attention to anything in that class the whole year, but for whatever reason, that lecture like really stuck with me. And I remember debating to buy some, and I didn't. And then that stuck the lesson in even more. So that I was really deep into this. And then what made me really a big fan of Cardano is a lot of things you're talking about, is the fact that once I had that experience of Bitcoin, I was like, okay, this is a massive thing because it's a fundamental transition of a technology that was obsolete, not for the people. Like, this could be something amazing. And so my eyes were very looking for what that would be next. And for my opinion, that was Cardano. I think this is the first time that something was built properly from the ground. And instead of just like in a world where everyone's sprinting, they're like, okay, let's do this the right way so we actually get everything sorted. So something you mentioned there was a proof of stake versus proof of work. I know a lot of people, like, we're crypto people, but so many people are about to become crypto people that don't understand any of this stuff. Could you give a quick rundown of what proof of stake is, what proof of work is, their differences, and what they even do and why they exist?
Yeah, so we'll start with proof of work because that's where crypto started. And you look at the way transactions are processed now. You go to the store, you swipe a credit card, you're relying on your bank or Visa to process that transaction for you. And one of the biggest points of crypto is decentralization. So then we think, okay, if we're going to make sure that one party or company is not processing the transaction, who is going to do it? So Satoshi, the creator of Bitcoin, thought, well, we have these computers. These computers have finite resources, and that finite resource is processing power. So what we'll do is we'll create a network of computers, that are all connected to each other, that are all processing transactions. And who processes that transaction is based on a lottery, and that's how it's not centralized. So all that network of computers, randomly, one of those computers is picked to process the transaction in Bitcoin. And the way, you kind of get more tickets in that lottery is a bigger computer or more computers or more processing power, right? And because you have this kind of lottery of who's going to process what, you can never attack Bitcoin. You can never go after that one computer and be like, we got him, we got Bitcoin, right? So that's how proof of work works. If you essentially have, 1% of all of the computers in the network, you're going to process 1% of the transactions, right? So, what you're doing though is because you're, solving these complex problems to show that you have that finite compute power, you're using a lot of electricity, right? So you're really solving a problem that doesn't do anything for the actual network. You're wasting a lot of money and a lot of energy that could be spent elsewhere, right? So this is kind of where proof of stake comes in. Ethereum, the second biggest cryptocurrency, has started out as proof of work, and they've gone to proof of stake now. Cardano, was one of the first layer 1 blockchains to come out, and in my opinion, had solved proof of stake. And really, what it is, it's just like proof of work, but you're removing that useless power consumption and the fake problems that need to be solved. So you have, say, billions of tokens in an ecosystem. So who processes what transaction? We don't want it to be one guy. We want it to be thousands of people or millions of people eventually, just like Bitcoin. So it's actually the person that owns the token. They stake it. They pick who processes their percentage of the transaction. So for example, I run a stake pool called Bloom. What we do is we help people locally in our town. Here's what a crypto wallet is. Here's how you use it. We make videos online for people. And we say, hey, when you set up your wallet, you need to pick a stake pool because that guy is going to process your percentage of the transactions in the network. So instead of, whoever has the most computers, it's whoever has onboarded the most people, essentially, whoever's gotten enough delegation to their pool. So, if you have 1% of all of the stake in the network, you're going to process 1% of all of the transactions. And it's random, just like Bitcoin. It's a slot lottery in the sense of you never know which stake pool operator is going to do it because it's based on the millions of people that use the network and then pick their person that's processing their transactions. So that's kind of the evolution from proof of work to proof of stake. It's really the same thing, but getting rid of what is unnecessary, and it is the power and the resource consumption.
Amazing. Yeah, and Cardano that was a massive focal point for Cardano. And so you run a staking pool. I think there's a lot of people that will be listening to this don't even know what that is. Could you explain like how you started one, what it is, and what's the benefits for being involved as an outside person?
Sure. So, earlier I mentioned, you need a computer so it can process these transactions. You have this network of computers that are processing transactions. You needed a really power-hungry computer with proof of work. Since we've gotten rid of that, really all a stake pool is a computer that's sitting there and waiting for its turn to process the transactions. So, let's say we did have 1% of all of the stake in the network. All of the ADA tokens are delegated to this pool. Then, 1% of the time, we're the guy that's processing it. So it's just a computer sitting there waiting for the transaction, waiting for its time to get picked in the lottery. And then once it's picked, it takes this thing called a block, which is just data, and the data is transactions, and it submits it to the network. And then all of the other, stake pools, they check. They're like, is that right? Yeah, it is. So that's why you hear it's called a validator node, because they're validating that it's the right block, the right set of transactions. And if it's not, then, it'll get kicked off. It'll say, okay, nope, that's not real. It doesn't follow the history, since Genesis. So that's really all a stake pool is. It's a computer that's processing transactions for a network, and you never know which computer is going to do it. And that's what makes the network decentralized, because you can't attack the computer that's going to do it because you never know who it's going to be.
Amazing. So it's way more efficient, still decentralized, solving a lot of the major pain points there. And so when you're involved in a staking pool, there's rewards given out. How does that whole thing work?
Sure. So with Bitcoin, when you put transactions on the blockchain, you're paid Bitcoin for it.
Yeah.
And it's the same thing with, Cardano. And there's a set inflation that slowly falls over time that pays out people that process transactions for the network and also regular users in the network. So if you bought ADA today, you could put the ADA into a wallet, and then you choose a stake pool in the ecosystem to process your percentage of the transactions, and then you actually get a yield for that. So right now, I think it's about 2.5%. So instead of just paying miners, Bitcoin miners, or just stake pool operators, what you do with proof of stake is you pay everybody in the network. Anybody that holds the token gets an APY as long as they choose who's processing their transactions, right? So there's a small inflation of, say 2.5% a year on the token, and you get it for decentralizing the network, because by choosing someone, you're picking another person that's not the same set of people to process transactions, right? So that's where the money comes in for regular users. And then stake pool operators, what they do is after they've gotten a bunch of people to delegate to them, they just take a small fee of say 5%, off of those rewards that their users are getting.
Okay, makes total sense. That's awesome. See, there's so many things that we have access to as adopters of Web3, but the average person has no clue. They look at just a ticker on a screen, and that's all they watch. And there's so much more going on. And the more that you're going to learn from listening to Peyton is that there's so many things that crypto, and especially Cardano, they solve real fundamental problems that exist in our current financial system, and they were built incredibly deliberately. When you're hearing a lot of these things, and I've had the situation too where I try to explain these things to my family or my parents, and they almost say oh, there's no way it would work like that. Why would it work like that? Everybody is kind of winning. Why would it work like that? And it's that's possible. It can work like that if you're doing it like they've done it, which is from the ground up and stacking and stacking, stacking. And obviously there was the very public separation between Charles, the founder of Cardano, and Ethereum. Were you involved back then when that kind of happened? How far back do you go where involvement in the Cardano ecosystem?
So I think, you kind of are alluding to this, but there's almost levels to this in a way. And I was so new to crypto back then that, I'd be the meme coin buyer nowadays.
Yes.
Right. So I was around, but I didn't watch it go down. And I've just kind of heard stories, in the aftermath, essentially.
Yeah. Can you explain from your understanding, why Cardano was built the way that it was after that? Because obviously that was the decision. Charles was okay, I'm going to go build my own thing. What were the the foundational principles as to why he felt something had to be different and what is now Cardano?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, we mentioned, Bitcoin was proof of work, and then Ethereum is the second one that came out that was also proof of work. So what does Ethereum do that's unique? It allows you to create smart contracts, and smart contracts are, a lot of these, kind of new spins on traditional finance. They come from smart contracts. I mean, a good example is, imagine, there's a group of people that all needed to insure their houses or insure their cars, but, only, 1 out of 10 of our cars are going to break down. So what we could all do is we could create a smart contract that says everybody's here is insured, and to be a part of this, you have to contribute $100 or $200 a month, for the next 5 years. And any moment, if your car breaks down, this pot of money will automatically send you money to, for your car. Well, if you look at traditional finance, there has to be somebody that's sitting in the middle there who's taking all of the money in. And, I've lived in Florida for some of my life, and, that person in the middle, what they like to do is they like to take all of this insurance money from all of these property owners, and then when a hurricane comes through, they declare bankruptcy, right? So they were paying out their salaries, they were making sure, they're eating, but then all of these people that are left without homes, they now don't have a home because there isn't enough money in the pot to pay for all of the homes, even though there should be. So that's what crypto, ultimately allows you to do, is kind of, remove the middleman. And the way that you do that is with code. You have these smart contracts that, say, if this happens, then this happens, and there's no others, there's no nuances to code if it's written in the correct way, right? So, Charles Hoskinson was a co-founder of Ethereum, and, he just saw some issues with it. He felt that there needed to be on-chain governance instead of, this foundation that ultimately makes all of the decisions on the future and the roadmap. Ethereum also had a lot of hacks, billions and billions of dollars of smart contract hacks. Imagine you guys all have this insurance fund, and because the code wasn't written correctly, it just all goes away, and now nobody's getting the payout, right? So, what Charles did is he saw all of these issues. Ethereum had this mantra of move fast and break things. And, Charles thought, well, if we're going to be building, the world's financial system, Ethereum calls themselves the world computer, essentially. We need to make sure that, the systems that we're building don't break and don't cause more problems in people's lives. And, in programming, there's different types of programming languages. There's high assurance code, code that's, used by NASA or used by banks so they don't get hacked. And, that's how he thought about Cardano at this time. And the inception of it is what we'll do is we'll use academia. They've done well at, researching things. We'll create, different, work with different schools and research how ought a cryptocurrency that powers the entire world's financial system be built, and have the smartest cryptographers in the world, kind of tackle that problem for years before you even write a line of code. And, that's what happened. And the choices that were made, they chose a better programming language. There hasn't been any major hacks on Cardano. That, on-chain governance is launching now. So, Cardano was built in hindsight of Ethereum. And, as you get older, you learn things, and you're like, well, if only I could go back. And I think that Cardano is that with Ethereum.
Yeah. And when you're working with something as important as the financial system, that kind of thought seems like an obvious thing for me. And so that's why when I learned more and more about Cardano, I just had so frequently this moment of, how does everyone not see this is the right way to do this? Look at all the problems that we experience today. A lot of the pain that we experience today is just the flaws in the system that bred the pain, right? And so if you have an opportunity to go back and build from the ground up, that seems like an obvious thing to me. But for whatever reason, like, a lot of that belief system is what's resulted in a lot of non-positive public opinion from people who are trying to trade things in Cardano. And so that's why Cardano gets mocked a lot. And especially, like, I don't even think a lot of people that are outside of crypto even understand that, like, ETH and Cardano do similar things. They don't even, like, see them in the same light whatsoever. And so could you explain, I guess the moving fast was a massive thing for why they got early adoption, but why does Ethereum have so much attention and institutional adoption if it's an inferior technology?
It's just because it was first, right? And then, with money comes narratives that people want to uphold, right? And the way I look at it is, each cryptocurrency in the top 10 is a different bet, right? They've kind of taken different choices. They've taken a different set of trade-offs. When you're living in America, versus Europe, it's hard to say that one is just completely better. You're just accepting a different set of trade-offs. And, in Europe, the food is way better. Mm-hmm. It's healthier, it tastes better, but in America, we have other things, that people may like. So So that's kind of how I look at these cryptocurrencies. If they've chosen a different set of trade-offs, and it's going to take time for the markets to fully understand those trade-offs. It's going to take time for businesses to understand those trade-offs, to then build on that technology to see which provides more value for the real world. And looking at cryptocurrency, you can look at market caps as well. And I like to look at the top 10 almost as a risk curve as well. So you look at Bitcoin, it was first. It was the least risky. It's the least risky one in my eyes, to invest in. It's, not financial advice. It's just, Bitcoin, I look at it as like the 401k of crypto now.
Yep.
Right. Ethereum, you could say, it has less risk, just based on the market cap, based on the usage, based on the adoption. But, once you kind of add in, the cyclical nature of technology, technology kind of gets stale over time. That hasn't really happened much with Bitcoin. But, I tend to think like Ethereum is a sinking ship. But, is it less risky than Cardano? I would say it probably is, because there's more people that use it. But because there's less risk, there's less upside, right? So as you kind of look at this top 10, you realize like, okay, the market cap of Ethereum is, 300 billion. The market cap of Cardano is, off the top of my head, 25 billion, right? So then it has, similar technology, similar offering, different trade-offs, but it's worth around 10 times less, right? So in my eyes, it has a lot more upside if the market believes that it's going to provide that long-term value, right? So if you're kind of new to cryptocurrency, I'm a Cardano guy through and through for a lot of reasons, but I think it's good to diversify in this space, because each of these cryptocurrencies are different bets about the future, about technology, about what people are ultimately going to use. And while I like the trade-offs of Cardano, I like the focus on-chain governance, on security, and a high assurance code, that doesn't mean the world is not going to choose the Caitlyn Jenner coin, right? Like it doesn't mean that people don't love to gamble.
Yeah.
So it's good to diversify. I think in the past, I've been very strict, in being ethical and say, oh, we're designing technology to move the world forward, and that's what Cardano's made for. But there's just as many degenerates, maybe more, in the world than people that want to push the world forward, right? So hedge your bets and diversify, without offering too much advice there.
Yeah, as someone who's run a marketing agency for the past 7 or 8 years at this point, my job is to try to understand the masses. And in doing so, you realize that there are so many variables at play that dictate where the world goes. There can be things that to you are so obvious, and maybe objectively they're more positive solutions. But if the people don't get there, if you can't raise the level of awareness or you can't get the adoption needed, it just doesn't happen. And so I see that happen all the time. There's many things throughout history that there was good technology, bad messaging, and it never gets off the ground. Mm-hmm. From an outsider's perspective, as a marketer myself, I think one of the biggest problems Cardano has, and I'm hoping that they're going to remedy this, is just a messaging problem. Like the people who are involved in Cardano, with the exception of you and maybe a few others, a lot of them are really difficult for the average person to understand. Why I really want to get you on there was because you do such a good job of distilling this stuff down in a way that my mom can understand, which is super helpful for me because I always use that as the benchmark. I'm like, could I send this to my mom and would she understand? Because until we get to that point, I don't think Cardano can win, right? So how do we, in the Cardano community, communicate more effectively to the masses on the use cases of this? Because I think for a lot of the things that are happening where institutional adoption and people are building real things on Ethereum, I think Cardano would be a better place for almost all of the things happening, but it's not happening that way because Ethereum was first. And so it's kind of like on us to try to educate, but how do we do that in a way that people actually care to pay attention in a 6-second attention span economy?
I think my opinion on this has evolved quite a bit over time. And I think that it's really going to be people and products that do it, right? I think that, Cardano, the technology, I'm excited about it because I see what it can do for people in the world, but people just want to see what it can do for them, right?
It's true.
And I think that, it's on, someone who's building a product to show the value of their product and not even tell the person what's happening underneath.
Yes.
Right.
That's when it's great.
And, if we look at regulation, at least in the United States, I can't speak for other countries, the SEC has essentially said for the past 4 or 5 years that if you build any product that has any value for anyone, we're going to put you in jail or fine you. Mm-hmm. So, I think that we're entering this new time of of utility. I think that that's why like the number one product lately in crypto has been, creating these meme coins that have no utility or no real value because the government said we're not allowed to create, the things that crypto was ultimately made for. So I think that we're kind of shifting out of that era. We're shifting out of this era of, non-utility coins and kind of, insiders kind of scamming and moving towards, real businesses on chain that people can invest in. And from a user perspective, they're just going to be using an app on their phone. They're just going to be using a product that they like, or they're going to be supporting, maybe a content creator that they like. And, that's the way I see this going, is less about, layer one blockchains and like kind of a bunch of nerds talking about smart contract languages, and more like, man, I like this app. It's pretty, it makes me a little bit of money, and that's that.
100%. I love that because everyone's always thinking about what's in it for me, essentially. And why do people love the technology they use today? Because it's just easy and it was built for them, or at least it got to that place and that point. If you're enjoying the episode so far, consider subscribing to the channel for more similar conversations on the latest things changing our world. You can expect to hear from the best minds in AI, Web3, entrepreneurship, and all the other things that are changing the way we live. It takes 2 seconds, click that button down below, and make sure if you're on YouTube to hit that bell so YouTube actually shows you our episodes. Let's get back to the conversation. So the problem that I guess Cardano has is that there's not many people building on it. Like, I'm sure there's a lot of efforts being done in the background to try to get more and more people to build on there. But I think a big thing is that people don't even understand the benefits of building a business that is on chain. Could you give some examples of like why that would be a good decision and how that can be pretty insanely different from a Web 2 based business or a traditional business?
Yeah. I have definitely a good answer with this one. So, the first benefit that I'll just be straightforward about is people that care. Imagine you have like a coffee shop and you're starting your coffee shop in a place where there's 50 coffee shops. No one cares. When you build on a blockchain, almost think about it as like a new jurisdiction. Even though, you could put your coffee on chain, for example, right? Because there's no coffee on Cardano, there probably is at this point. But because there isn't, you're going to have thousands of people that now wake up and support your business and push it out there online because you're building something in an ecosystem that they love and participate in. So that is the easiest sell for a business, is you're going to have thousands and thousands of people that you are now in front of because you are building something for that blockchain. Almost think of these blockchains as different jurisdictions. I know a guy that, he's doing beehives, and he used Cardano to raise money to build more beehives, right? That is a way that businesses now can attract new people. If you are already good at something in the real world and you take that and kind of add a blockchain spin on it that does actually add value for the people on that network, they will show up and support you through and through, right? So that's the first, kind of added benefit, is just communities of people that will support your business. The second, it really depends on that. The first one is kind of like benefit for everyone, right? The second one, I don't think blockchain solves every problem in the world. There's very niche kind of utilities that it just blows, any other technology out of the water on, right? And a lot of it, to me, is this ability to incentivize action by spreading out value, right? So if you have 100 tokens and everybody holds one token, and then that's 1% of all of the company's revenue, you can just have a smart contract that then you send the money in, it distributes it all evenly out that. So like distribution of ownership, identity, you could have like a little membership for your club that's all handled on chain. This is a bit techy, but you can almost think of blockchain as a decentralized database. When you are running a front end company and you have a bunch of people swiping their credit card for coffee, you're storing all of those transactions in a centralized database, right? There's utilities for decentralized databases, a database that you don't own, and really it comes to value. Who owns what? It's better to have, a blockchain determining that, because you can't control it, than one guy. So incentivizing, people in mass, through distributing ownership instead of giving all the value to the top. Blockchain's great for that. Kind of taking your existing business and reaching new customers. It's great for that. And third, kind of identity and like governmental systems and infrastructure, as I would say the greatest benefit benefits as of now.
Yeah, I smiled a lot when you said the word incentives because I had literally written down incentives are way more aligned. And Charlie Munger, I believe, has the saying, if you show somebody's incentives, I'll show you their behavior, or their behavior becomes obvious. And that makes so much sense too. Like a massive benefit is, as someone who's built businesses myself, getting people to be motivated and care about something is one of the most difficult things as a business owner to do. And if you build with a technology like this, inherently, you can build it in a way where they legitimately are incentivized properly for the positive outcome of that business. That's really difficult to do or very expensive to do in many other ways. And you're relying on a lot of third parties, which are not beneficial. And things change, emotions change. A lot of those things can come and go. So like just hearing that, if you're a business owner, that should really open your eyes. Because even for me, I was like, some businesses that were about to start, I'm like, I should probably look into building this, incorporating blockchain and probably on the Cardano ecosystem. But the problem with that is that how do you start to learn how to build a business in this world? Like, how do you even learn how to build here?
Well, and this is why, I was mentioning like products.
Yeah.
Right. Because, this is a field in itself. I don't think it's, building an incentive system is for everyone. I really don't. I think there needs to be a company that productizes distributing of incentives and goes and sells it to businesses on the ground. Here's just a random idea that I just came up with. But imagine if you're selling a $5 coffee, but we'll give $1 of that $5 coffee to the guy that referred you to the coffee shop. And imagine you can just, as a business owner, you have some guy come to you and say, hey, we've built this system. You give us, 15% of the incentive and the rest is going to go directly back to the customer. All you have to do is download an app and sign this contract that's straightforward. The business is going to be like, fuck yeah. They don't need to know about it. They're just like, they're thinking of Charlie Munger. Yeah. They're like, well, if I'm paying people, then maybe more customers are going to come and they're going to give it a try. Right. So I think that is what is needed in this industry is people to use this technology and productize it and sell it to people. You look at telecom communications, for example. I know a guy that runs a telecom business and, he built technology on top of the protocol, and then productized it and then made, millions off of it. And he's, been doing that for 20 plus years. So, look at blockchain technology as infrastructure and realize that there's a middle layer there. And that middle layer is the real world. It's people, it's trust. And that's where the money's made, is by being the person that understands the technology, knows how to build on it, and then productizes it for regular people, right? So the layer one blockchain in my eyes is for, people that want to invest in layer one technologies. And then the second person it's for is people that want to use this infrastructure and technology to then productize it and then bring it to the real world. Right. So, what I would say, you have to spend some time, to understand this stuff. It took me, I would say, years before I got, a decent understanding of it. And that's going to happen anywhere. It's going to happen on Bitcoin, Ethereum, and Cardano. And, I'd rather just be honest to the new people coming in and saying, oh, it's so easy. You can just create an app overnight. I've been building an app for 3 years now. It's been hard, but this is like a new and emerging technology. And I think that, new things that provide a massive amount of value for the world, they're never easy.
No. So I have a team of developers. How can I get them to start learning how to build in this space? Like a genuine question. Like where do they go for resources for education?
So the first thing that pops up that's like a public resource is there's a developer.cardano.org, developer.cardano.org. There's a bunch of very basic resources there. Secondly, you just kind of start messaging people. Okay. I think that in business, if I was going to kind of venture into a new place, I would look at, who's there, who's done well in the past, who seems very knowledgeable. And, a lot of them may do it for free, but I would pay for some consultation hours. I would say, okay, what's the best, here's what I want to accomplish. What is the existing tooling? Because when people come into this space, they think that they have to build everything from scratch. And that's not true. There's a bunch of existing tooling where if you just focus on trying to solve this one tooling problem, you'll waste 6, 7, 8 months and run out of cash. So you need to have an understanding of the landscape. You need to maximize and focus on the exact thing that you want to build, and then find all of the other existing pieces that you need to facilitate and maximize that middle piece there, right? Anything that's not your niche, not your product, find something that is already built and use that as a stepping stone to get to what you're productizing optimizing and delivering. So, crypto is still, at least Cardano. Cardano, you can very easily reach people, and everyone's very helpful. People have kind of stepped on a Lego a few times, and they want to make sure the next guy doesn't. So kind of educate yourself, listen to, X Spaces, listen to podcasts, reach out to people and see if they're willing to do a 30-minute call with you and, pay for some consultation hours and spend some time digging and understanding, what tooling is there, what the people that are there. And once you have that, then decide, should I do this? How much is it going to cost? How much can I actually focus on my piece? Because you may be missing, that tooling for what you need may not be there. And you have to add that into your equation when it comes to actually building.
And I've seen that on Twitter too, that the people who build here are very open to everyone being involved, sharing their losses as well as their wins and being fairly transparent. So I think that's super valuable. So if you're looking to build in this world, which I highly advocate, go do what Paige just said, go look, go talk, get involved in the communities, jump into spaces. A lot of it goes down on X or Twitter, so definitely be active there. But another thing that really attracted me to Cardano versus other things is that in a world where crypto Web3 is seen as kind of the Wild West, they're very focused on governance and principles of that. Can you speak to like the whole governance approach on Cardano? And there's a lot of stuff going on right now, like currently too, in that world.
Sure. So if you look at, I always try to compare it to other cryptocurrencies so we can set kind of a lay of the land here. But what Cardano does uniquely with governance is it does the governance on chain. So you and I right now, we could say, okay, we don't like this parameter or this law or this rule with the Cardano network. And we could get together, we could submit a proposal right now and have the entire world vote on it. And if they say yes, then, and there's also a constitutional committee, if they say yes as well, 4 of the 7, then that is submitted and enacted on chain, right? So it's, essentially anybody can, kind of get together and promote something and push it forward so that it happens, right? The second thing that really sets Cardano apart is there's a treasury of 1.7 billion ADA that people can, if you have this new idea that you think is going to bring value back to Cardano and back to your users, and you're the guy to build it, you can request those funds to actually build out that piece of infrastructure, right? Ethereum, it doesn't have a treasury. Bitcoin, it doesn't have a treasury. And when I mentioned different trade-offs earlier, these are some of the trade-offs that you have to look at. Bitcoin, you don't have to worry about inflation, coming from the treasury because of, some guy messing up, a project that he built. But there's also barely ever any upgrades to Bitcoin. That's why it remains a dinosaur. That's why it's the 401k. Ethereum, there's really just one group of core developers that decide the future roadmap. Mm-hmm. And, a lot of the future Ethereum roadmap is just Cardano, to be quite honest with you. It's like, fuck, we got to catch up to these guys, right? So, with Cardano, you have a trade-off. You have this completely open and decentralized ecosystem that anybody can propose something, but, what if the guy that proposes is an idiot? So it's like each of these blockchains is a different kind of take on how we should do, governance. And, Ethereum's kind of more centralized in my eyes. Bitcoin's like, well, we don't do it at all. And then Cardano is like, well, let's put all of this on chain and make it public and transparent and, make it democratic, Yeah,
I prefer the democratic approach for sure. And true, genuine democracy is achieved with blockchain technology. That's actually possible. And so you mentioned that Bitcoin doesn't really do anything different than what it's always done, but Cardano is attempting to build upon Bitcoin to provide a solution to a massive problem. Can you speak to the approach to bringing DeFi to Bitcoin through Cardano?
Yeah. So in 2021, everybody was like, they were looking at Ethereum, and the fees on Ethereum were ridiculously expensive.
Yeah.
I know a guy that paid $1,000 for a transaction.
No way. The worst I've ever paid was like $100, but that's
same for me. Yeah. I wouldn't have paid it, but he had, if you get a loan and you have collateral, you can get liquidated, if the value of it drops. So he had to pay $1,000 to save the rest, essentially. So, I was like, I get it. But, we had these problems with fees on Ethereum and also the smart contract hacks that I mentioned earlier. So a lot of like the narrative back then was, let's try to build, better Ethereum. All of this value is on Ethereum. And what the blockchain industry has kind of quickly realized is, Ethereum isn't all that. Bitcoin is the only blockchain that has like reached kind of this global, well-known own utility of being a better gold, essentially, a better store of value than gold. And instead of, trying to just beat Ethereum, what if, Bitcoin's worth over $1 trillion now? It might even be catching up to 2 trillion.
It's close.
Yeah. What if we just built DeFi for Bitcoin? Another thing that happened in 2021 is Celsius. What they were doing is they were taking everybody's Bitcoin and giving people cash. And the reason why someone would do that is because when you sell your Bitcoin, you have to pay capital gains tax. Whereas if you take out a loan, you don't have to pay capital gains tax. So everybody was taking their Bitcoin, giving it to some random guy like Alex Machinsky, who ended up stealing it all in a bankruptcy clause. And, what if we did that on chain with a smart contract with no middleman that can take it and use your funds and invest them elsewhere and lose them? That is the drive. You have this $2 trillion industry now that has no way to securely take out loans on their assets to, essentially avoid capital gains tax. That's what everyone does with property in the real world. It's a normal thing. And, Bitcoin had this upgrade recently, the first upgrade in a while, is a Taproot upgrade that essentially allows you to plug, other blockchains into Bitcoin. And, I mentioned earlier that, Cardano is a different take on where the industry is going. Bitcoin is designed in this way. It's called UTXO, right? Cardano is also UTXO. Ethereum is the account model, right? And because Bitcoin and Cardano are both the, UTXO model, they work better together. You're trying to, if you merge Bitcoin and Ethereum, it's like you're trying to merge two incompatible systems together. So, earlier I mentioned these research papers that Cardano did before lines of code were written. That was the first paper, was what can we do better with Bitcoin? And that is the foundation of Cardano is using what Bitcoin has done well and evolving it and then adding in smart contracts like Ethereum had. So, what people are realizing is if you have, $10 billion worth of Bitcoin on Ethereum, that is much likely to be more risky than having $10 billion worth of, Bitcoin on Cardano because it's two systems that are meant to work together, right? Another thing that's unique is you can actually use the same wallet. If I create a Cardano wallet, that wallet can also work for Bitcoin.
Wow.
Right? So you kind of have this race in our industry right now between all of these different blockchains to build, essentially a secure layer 2 for Bitcoin to bring DeFi to this kind of dinosaur, $2 trillion dinosaur, right?
Wow. So it seems like Cardano is the best position to do that, which would bring in a crazy amount of adoption. How far away do we think that is?
So I spoke with, this team BTC OS. They're one of the teams that are doing it. I know IOG, the creators of Cardano, is also doing it. The Bitcoin conference is next month. I think it's on the 29th or the 28th of next month. What I've been told, I'm not the guy building it. Timelines always change. But what I've been told is that we will see Bitcoin on Cardano next month.
Wow, next month.
Yeah, that's what I've been told. It could be delayed. Software, it takes time sometimes, but
I've lived there, yeah.
Yeah, people, that's what they're saying. It could be wrong, but that's what I've been told. If we don't see it next month, because they were kind of, ballsy enough to say next month, I imagine it'll be within the next, 3 to 4 months.
Wow, that's a lot faster than I was expecting. That's amazing news. And so why that's such a big deal is that Cardano's been built for the most part. It's here, but it doesn't have the adoption, the users, the people building in the ecosystem that can really flex its muscles to show you how impressive it really is and how many problems it can actually solve. And so when they crack this egg, that's a massive one. So that's super exciting. The other one I wanted to ask your opinion on was it's midnight airdrop. Is that what it's called?
Yeah, I think the fancy term is glacier airdrop.
Okay.
But that's the midnight blockchain airdrop. So, just to kind of go, start from the beginning there, we have these layer ones, they have different trade-offs. Cardano's, trade-off is that it maximalizes security, right? And decentralization, which in my opinion are the two biggest value propositions of cryptocurrency. So, Solana, for example, which is another layer 1 blockchain, they've kind of maximized transactions and throughput and speed, which has worked out for them in some ways, right? But then kind of put security and decentralization on the back burner. Cardano's take on that is, we'll essentially build this system that allows you to plug in these layer 2s for niche applications, right? And Midnight is one of the, they're calling it a partner chain. And what utility Midnight brings is privacy for one, there's essentially going to be two different tokens on Midnight. One's a completely private token and one's completely public, right? And businesses need this, in my opinion. When I send somebody a transaction, I don't want to show them, what groceries I bought last week, and users shouldn't even have to think about this. So, Midnight is also going to plug into other blockchains as well. Midnight's going to be one of those middle layer chains that essentially allows you to bring assets from this chain to, another chain. And, to get all of these chains to, use it and to be excited about it, what it's doing is it's looking at assets, holders of assets on XRP, on Solana, on Bitcoin, Ethereum, and Cardano, and then giving a large portion of that token out to all of those users instead of doing a token sale, right? And it's an interesting take. I like it. Charles did an AMA yesterday. He mentioned that he's the bigger portion of it's going to go to Cardano users that they provided the most support. I'm like, oh.
Yeah, it's a big win. Yeah, amazing. I think we're close, man. I think there's a lot of things happening that are coming kind of almost as a perfect storm. Obviously, things change and who knows how things will go, but it seems like it's a very exciting time for the ecosystem. But as I was thinking about this, whenever, with all these episodes, when I bring someone on who knows as much as you do, I'm always trying to catch myself where are we assuming knowledge? And I think one thing that we kind of skimmed over was the fact of like what a layer one provides to people. Like, we can build apps on this stuff, but we really haven't talked about what is the benefit of a DApp, like a decentralized application. And I think what would be very helpful for people is to compare a modern day business that everybody knows and how it would function differently if it was a decentralized version of that. Is there an example that comes to mind that you think would be powerful?
Yeah. It's really like a lot of the new apps, like the new age apps that we're seeing, like, Uber, DoorDash, essentially imagine instead of you going to DoorDash to order your food, there's like 3 different apps that are all using this kind of, layer one. And what this layer one is providing for these 3 different companies that are built on top of it is a distributed network of drivers and the revenue to those drivers, right? So what it looks like is you have this company on top, they're paying the money down here, and then they're building the front end service to order the food, right? So it's like, that's one example that I can think of is just kind of, decentralizing, ride share, decentralizing, food delivery. Trying to think of another good example. I really think people should look at layer ones as like a technology or as a tool. Okay. And I really do believe that people are going to evolve out of this mindset of like, what can the layer one do for me, and more like, what can this product do for me? Because if you look at the internet, right? The internet runs on this protocol, TCP IP, and it's just, an IP address. You guys may have seen one before, and another one on the other end, and they're sending packets, and the packets are just this video, for example, that are being sent from one to the other. People don't really need to know that. They don't even need to know that protocol exists. And then another guy comes in and they build, HTML on top of TCP IP, or they build Bitcoin on top of TCP IP, right? So, I think that like that, what the layer one does for them, people don't really even need to know that. It's just what the product does for them. And then business-minded people need to know what the layer one can do for people and what value propositions it can provide so that they can productize it for people. And I think that, the biggest thing, that I mentioned kind of, identity earlier, memberships would be huge. Revenue share as well, like trustless revenue share, where if you're buying into a company, it can be guaranteed that revenue that's coming in is going directly into a smart contract and distributed among the shareholders. No middleman that's doing that in a court, in a contract, holding that business relationship together, right? So it has, niche utilities. And then, I think that for regular people, it's like products. They're going to kind of get them to understand, right? I mean, the biggest product that crypto offers right now is, the fact that you can buy into this currency that's not being inflated by the government. You look at some blockchains though, they're still being inflated by somebody else. There's still a central banker there in the blockchain, so you kind of have to understand these, the tokenomics, and you have to understand what you're, buying into. And, I wouldn't say that all of this stuff is going to come easy to everyone. I think that, what you should research if you're new to crypto right now is tokenomics. You need to understand liquidity liquidity pools. You need to understand vesting periods. You need to understand, total supply versus, what the total supply is going to be 2 years from now. You really need to start kind of getting these little tiny details if you want to invest in layer ones and ever think that you're going to make any money off of them. If you just want to be the guy that buys something, slowly for the next 3-4 years, and then you have a big payoff, it's going to have to be, you're going to have a little bit of money already, in my opinion, and you're going to have to be buying Bitcoin and, some out of the top 10, because a lot of it is 95% of it's scams, in my opinion.
The vast majority, for sure. And I think that's what gets focused on from people who don't know that there is real things being built with a potential for real things to be built. And I think about it in tech. I think as humans, we adapt to our new normal so quickly, we forget who we were yesterday. And we walk around with these phones in our pockets, and the experiences that we know and love and truly expect, they were built over a technological change of the internet, and the smartphone was being a massive catalyst for true mass adoption. Like most of the apps that even my grandparents use, if I tried to explain that concept to them, like before the phone exists, they'd be like, that's witchcraft, voodoo, like they would never use it. And even when it was new, they're like, why would you ever trust that? I think if you're a builder listening to this should really excite you, because there's a massive opportunity to be on that forefront. And much like Peyton's saying, it's not going to be easy, because it shouldn't be. Like when you're doing massive things, if you go back and there's a reason why all of the documentaries are about like Facebook, Spotify, because of how hard it was, right? And so why are they billion-dollar companies? Because they did the hard things no one else was willing to do, because they saw where it was going. If you're here, I still think you're very early on things that are being built, and you can be that person. It's just not going to be easy, but it's worth it because of the outcome. But it's also worth it because it can be an even better outcome for everybody involved. That's kind of what I see. Maybe I'm too much of an optimist here, but I think that it can really also push the world forward in terms of everyone's incentives, a word we're bringing up again, being more aligned. I think that can lead to some pretty awesome things. So I'm super excited to see what gets built in it. Truthfully, from within my company, we're trying to learn on like, what does this look like? So we're going to start having these conversations, like you said, to go speak to the people that are building things and try to see where our blind spots are. Because we're launching an NFT project on Cardano, and I thought it'd be straightforward and simple. I get all the artwork done from an artist. I get all the metadata sorted, and then I try to get it up, and it's like, oh no, you got to do this, pay this, so this. I was like, oh wow, okay. I thought I was prepared. I was not prepared. And so just there's so many things that you don't know, but the potential when it's done can still be pretty fantastic. So I got a lot of education to do. So I appreciate you opening my eyes and also being here as a back and forth. The other thing that I had on my notes here was we've talked a lot about how the world sees crypto, and in particular how that's so influenced by the political narratives, right? Whatever the administration says about something dictates how a lot of people see it, because that's what the mainstream media will tell them. With this recent administration, there's been a big shift and a change in how crypto is being seen. Previously, if you're unaware and you're new to this whole crypto world, much like Peyton said, if you're trying to build anything in crypto, they essentially were like, we're shutting down your banks, you're going to jail, nothing is happening. So that really slowed down genuine innovation in this space. You said before we got on here that you've been watching this administration and their approach to crypto pretty closely. Can you explain the course of events, how we got here, and where we're probably going?
Yeah, definitely. In the last 4 years, essentially what's been happening is anybody that's doing anything meaningful in this industry, and, I do look at cryptocurrency, like when I think about the two biggest things in today's time that, are revolutionizing the world, I think it's independent content creation, like what we're doing right now, AI, and cryptocurrency.
I agree.
And we just took the third one and said, if you guys are doing this, you need to go live somewhere else or we're going to put you in jail.
Stupid.
It's insane. And then on top of that, we were going after people in other countries. So even if you weren't even born in America, we were still knocking at your door. Hey, you messed up. And this was while Sam Bankman-Fried, was doing corrupt things and stealing billions of dollars from people and shaking hands with the people in the government. The actual people that were building this industry were getting prosecuted, right? So in 2021, there was this bill that passed called the Infrastructure Bill. And the Infrastructure Bill, on like the 300th page, that's a random guess as far as the number, but I remember being like real far back there. It stated that if you're building a DeFi product, or you are running a stake pool, or a Bitcoin miner, a validator node essentially, that you had to report the name, the address, and the social security number for every single user that you had of your platform. So something that was literally impossible. We heard, I told you guys earlier about this slot lottery, right? Well, because there's that lottery there, you don't know whose transaction you're processing. You're just processing them. So it was impossible to follow that law. That law stood for, it was put in a bill, that had a stimulus check in it, just to make everybody happy. For 4 years, that law was there. They didn't really prosecute on it, but they could have, and just hearing that, if you're going to go do something big, if you're going to build something revolutionary, you're not going to do it in the United States if you read that law exists. During that time, the SEC also called ADA security. They were suing Kraken, and they sued Binance, and they listed ADA as one of the securities for the reason that they were bringing the lawsuit to light in the first place. So they, that caused a tremendous amount of damage on our industry. The same thing with the XRP folks, the Ripple folks. They had lawsuits against them over and over and over again. Shout out to them for sticking it through. And, eventually they just removed it from the lawsuit, and the damage was already done. They FTX, Celsius, stole billions of dollars from people, allegedly stole billions of dollars from people, and they go belly up. And they were registered in Delaware, the United States. And then, so it's just like complete, the SEC did the exact opposite of what we pay our taxes for them to do. They push all innovation out of our country, and that is coming to an end. It is. I mean, we're in this weird world where, the same guy that's like saving the industry is like doing insider trading, but you got to take the good with the bad. If you're a top 240, Trump holder, go meet him. Go to the White House and say hello. But, at the same time, that law that I mentioned at the end of the infrastructure bill, they got rid of that 2 weeks ago. It wasn't just Trump, saying it's gone. The Congress signed it, the Senate signed it, and Trump signed it. So it's like we're in really interesting times because we're getting more clarity. A lot of this is kind of being pulled away. The overreach, the stifling of innovation is coming to an end, and there is a new beginning ahead of us. And it's going to be rocky times, but it's exciting to see. Yeah, there's a silver lining to it all, of course.
Completely. Yeah, it's obviously painful that we slowed innovation so moronically, like it was silly, but it's also exciting if you're hearing this, right? That things are changing and that you could be one of the people on the forefront of a major shift. And if they're making these changes, there's reasons why they're making it, right? And with Trump and people openly being so pro crypto and buying obscene amounts of crypto, why, like Trump's buying so much, and it seems like a lot of it's Ethereum. Why are they buying so much crypto?
I mean, I think it's shout out to Peter Schiff. I think it's, the changing world order. Shout out to Ray Dalio. I think the U.S. is on the way down. I mean, we have entered, I think 2008 may have been the start of it. Maybe it was even the 70s, but the U.S. dollar is on the way down, and it's following the same path that every single currency has ever followed. Mm-hmm. And, I think that it's quite obvious that, you have a few options of, assets that you can go into, Bitcoin being one, gold being another. It seems to me that China is choosing gold. It seems to me that, Europe and Russia and the US, they're all choosing cryptocurrency assets. So yeah, I think that they're trying to, hedge their bets. I think they're trying to get out of the US dollar right before they, continue this printing cycle. Does that, Peter Schiff was like, oh, it's all going to come to an end. It's all going to collapse. But I think that the U.S. is so strong that it's going to take a lot more time than people think. And we may have a few of these cycles left, before we see, a new driver or a new driver of value or new, economic, world currency. It could just be Bitcoin. It could be a derivative of Bitcoin in a sense, a currency that has some Bitcoin backing it up. Right. So I think that that's why they're buying it. I think that they have more information than us.
They know what's coming.
Yeah, as well. So, that's why I just think the world's changing. This is stuff that we were saying back in 2017. And
yes,
it's weird that it's happening. It gives me goosebumps at times. Like, oh, you were right. That's fucking weird.
Man, I can't tell you how many conversations I had with people where people are like, you're obsessed with this stuff and you're kind of crazy. And I'm like, no, you just don't see where the puck is going. Right. But I think why I was so like, this is so obvious this is going to happen is because I think inherently I'm an early adopter of things. I look at something and I I take in as much data as I possibly can, and I make a decision, and I make one with conviction. And so with crypto, it was such an obvious decision for me. And I think that's probably fairly true for a lot of people that were early adopters of crypto or got into it the second they saw it and they were curious and they understood. But when you're like that, we grossly underestimate how much it takes for behavior and beliefs to change, right? And I think that's case in point with all of these things happening right now, and case in point with the conversations that I have with people. I no longer try to advocate for anything anymore. I just simply listen and take in data for seeing where are you coming with this, because I learned the wrong way or the hard way, that when I try to push my beliefs, it doesn't lead to anything positive, and it makes total sense. They're not coming to it with the same level of things that I have that brought me here, right? So for me trying to communicate at that level, it makes no sense whatsoever. So it will have to be from sources that they've seen, trusted, and understand to make this kind of shift happen. And I think this stuff with Trump and the administration will do that. But for people who are listening to this conversation, like if they're getting involved, it's crazy if you're not at least asking some questions. You know what I mean? Like at least getting involved in this world, because if they put their money in that place, like Peyton said, they know stuff we don't know. And so if they're betting that large into this space, you should probably be pretty curious. And if you have a bit of money, maybe you do a bunch of research and you pick where to put it. You make a bet, like Peyton said, and you try to become involved in that community and really be there. And if you don't have any risk profile whatsoever, Bitcoin is an obvious place to put some money. They're all going to have to buy large sums of Bitcoin. Like Peyton said, imagine a scenario where the global accepted currency, the means of exchange, becomes Bitcoin. The countries have to hold Bitcoin. They have to. And so just from that alone, they haven't done that yet. And so in any major way. And so if you're there now, you can benefit from that taking place without having to really do anything. So I've heard crazy numbers thrown around. Like obviously Saylor's a massive advocate of Bitcoin, but for price, people love price predictions. If you had to guess what the ceiling is for the next 5 to 10 years on Bitcoin, how high do you think this thing goes?
I mean, on 5 to 10 years, I mean, it could, in my opinion, it could probably go to $1 million.
That was my number 2.
And the reason I say that is because of the changing world order thing. And, on top of that, you have to look at, the emergence of AI that's happening right now.
Massive shift.
I dropped out of college, 4 years ago, and, a lot of my friends that I were going to school with, they're just now graduating, and they're worried about finding jobs. And I think a lot of us kind of have that worry right now of the whole world's changing, and this is like our version of industrialization, and there still will be jobs for people. But as a reason to get Bitcoin, I think it's to another reason is to protect against that inevitable future of it being harder to earn value, because often what technology does is it centralizes value creation to less and less people, right? And it's already pretty rough out there. I mean, how much I think what is it? The top X billionaires hold 50% of the U.S.'s wealth. It's already like that now. So I think that there is this may be a bit conspiratorial, maybe this is a bit, far reaching, but, I think we're almost at a race for time. If you're a young man in this world or in the middle, you kind of have to create some value for yourself and your family to preserve, what for what's to come, in my opinion. I don't think the world's going to end, but it's going to greatly change. And oftentimes I think it takes money and time to adapt. And I think that, cryptocurrency is a good way, if you do it correctly, if you don't, buy scams or buy into some BS narrative, it's a good way to create value for yourself and your family on a medium timeline so that you can adapt, to the changing world order, essentially.
Completely. I was a massive advocate and still am of NFTs, largely because I saw what they represented from a human behavioral standpoint. In a world where everyone is freaking out and they have nothing to believe in and they're very short on finances, imagine it's something that aligns with their values, gives them an instant means of connection, and they can also potentially make money from it. When everyone was saying, oh, it's pictures on a screen, I was like, you don't understand people. You fundamentally don't get people or see where things are going. And with everything that you just described, that only makes me have more conviction in things like NFTs or projects in general, because that's all that it really is. It gives people hope. It gives people some sort of chance in a world where they feel like they have none. And that's why I think that there will be a massive shift shift in terms of a lot of money that when our generation starts to inherit money from our grandparents, we're not going to put it in the traditional finance system. That system screwed us. We can't make money there. So we're going to flood so much of our wealth into these spaces. And I think that it's going to go pretty insane. And I'm hopeful that if we remember how it feels to be here right now, and we don't create something that is incredibly similar in that situation in the future, and also hold the people in power accountable to make sure that doesn't happen. And I think inherently the technology is built for us to have a lot more of a say in that. But I think if you're hearing all this stuff, just zoom out. Think about even a few years down the road or where things are right now, and understand that eventually this stuff has to happen. It's not a matter of if, in my opinion, it's a matter of when. And much like you said, if you look at the top 10, it's basically like picking what role are these guys going to play. I think there's a world where a lot of them are involved and they have their own little niche, but thinking about what aligns with your values the most. And when you pick a project, a coin, or an NFT, that's a lot of what it is. And when we exist so much online, our associations are now public and they're forefront everywhere. So I think that the technology, people just didn't really get what was going on here with Web3 at all, crypto, NFT, etc. And so that's it in a nutshell. This stuff makes me so excited. So I appreciate you sharing all that you have here, because you do such a good job. I'll reiterate it again of distilling this stuff down. And you also have a YouTube channel too. So if anyone who's listening to this, I'm going to link that in the description box of this as well. Go over and subscribe to him. It's just like this stuff you're seeing here. It's like complex subjects that you should know about, delivered in a way that you can genuinely understand. So definitely go follow him there. I also want to hear about all the stuff that you're working on at Atrium. Can you explain what that is, what you guys are working on, all that good stuff?
Sure. So I just to comment real quick on that hope thing. This is why I think it's important to diversify, right? Because we're all human. We all make mistakes, and it's very easy to have your hope, kind of taken advantage of, right? So, we're not always going to pick winners.
No.
So pick a few of them, pick 4 or 5, because this space is innovative and it is the future. If you don't pick, Hawk Tua coin, Caitlyn Jenner coin, your Trump coin, you're probably going to do all right.
Yes.
Maybe, allegedly. But okay, Atrium. So, I got into crypto, I told you 2020. And I've helped onboard a lot of people through my YouTube channel locally. And I've seen that it's hard. It's hard to get involved. So what we've done is just tried to make crypto easy to use. So we have a platform that you can log into today, alpha.atrium.io. You do have to set up a wallet. I'll share a link with you that shows people step-by-step how to set up the wallet. And it just teaches you how to use crypto. It has videos in it. It has wallet features in it. You can send and receive. You can use different crypto products that we built that are live in there. And it's all on testnet right now. And what you can do is you can mint a profile. And this profile is an NFT that you can level up from learning about crypto, using the blockchain, engaging with people on social media. And the higher level that you reach, you'll actually get an airdrop when the project launches on mainnet later this year. So if you have never used crypto before, it really is perfect because it costs nothing. It's free. And we build all this educational material for you. And you get a free crypto token for trying it out once it launches on mainnet. So I'll send you a link that you can put down below. But that really is the goal of Atrium, is just to build, a community that's incentivized to grow and make crypto easy for people.
Amazing. That's so needed. And I think I'm so happy that you're involved in that, because I think that'll make it a smashing success. So if you are listening to this, watching this, wherever you're consuming it, there's a link to Atrium in the description or the show notes, whatever. So definitely go check that out. I think education is incredibly powerful, especially with technology that can change like this, because why it's so powerful is that I almost feel like it's a responsibility, if you're still here, to go educate yourself, because clearly you're curious and you're seeing all the pain and suffering all around you. And of course, the technology is not going to solve everybody's problems overnight, but it can alleviate a lot of stress, diminish pain. And for the movements that take place that need to happen, everyone needs to understand. And to do that, they need to be spoken to at a level in which they understand, right? Like, I can only explain things to people that have had similar experiences to me. Like, I can't explain why things matter or how things work to everybody, right? So you, listening, watching, you have a role in this as well. And that's another thing why I think crypto is so awesome, is that it is very inclusive. Like, when you buy a coin or you invest into a project, the community rallies behind you and you're kind of all in it together, right? And that doesn't really happen anywhere else. When you buy a stock, if let's say I own some Apple stock and my friend owns some Apple stock, like, it's not that big of a deal. We're like, okay, whatever. But when I buy Cardano and if I met Pay on the street and we were walking and we both started talking about Cardano, we would be like, let's go. We'd instantly feel that connection. And I think that can happen in this space a lot. So I'm super excited for that. Go educate yourself over at Atrium. The link is down below. And the only other thing that I had here, I think I had one more question. man. Is there anything that I've missed that we really should have covered for someone coming into this?
No, I think this has honestly been extensive. It's been a good one. I can't think of anything else.
Okay, cool. Then what we'll do is, if you're listening to this, you got some homework. First, it's go subscribe to this channel, and then go check out Atrium, and then definitely subscribe to this the channel for the show as well, because I'd love to have you on in the future so we can talk the latest updates and things that are happening within the ecosystem. But I think this is a great place to cap it. So we'll do that now, not to overwhelm the people listening. And yeah, I think that's all for me, Matt. If you have anything else, the floor is yours.
If you guys have any questions, join our Discord server. It's discord.gg/Atrium. We've got community of like 8,000 people in there that are all just trying to learn about crypto. So
Amazing.
It's a great place for you to ask questions and kind of educate yourself. So join there, check out the testnet, and thank you so much for having me on, Ben. It's been a great show.
Yeah, it's been great to meet you and great to talk. And we'll have you on again soon.
See you guys.
Bye-bye.